Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to episode adventure. We want to call it number 220 of some movie reel.
Whoa.
Today we have a fantastic talk by our very own Mr. Eamon McKinney here. Very well known to this crowd. Give him a big hand. We're going to hand this over to Eamon, and we're looking forward to a great introduction to this today. Thank you very much. Here we go.
Thank you. All right. Okay, well, we can start with that. Eustace Mullins. We lost Eustace in 2010. Sad for everybody that knew the man. Eustace Mullins, as explained in that bio, was instrumental in producing the foundational work on which now modern day truth tellers set their scene. It's his work that they base it on. So, who was he? He's mainly known for his work, but very few people understand the scope of his work. His body of work was immense. And we'll touch on some of that today. We're going to show a couple of video clips. But the most important thing to understand is who this man was. What he did, only he could have done. There are some things that require a unique individual. Only he could have done what he did. So, who was he? Well, let's show what Wikipedia says about him if you do a search. Next slide. Eustace Mullins was an American, what does that say? Now you got one of your heads up there, Dennis, come on. Was an American writer and political activist widely known as a white supremacist, anti-Semitic conspiracy theorist, propagandist and Holocaust denier. So he really got to them. Eustace wasn't any of those things. Not at all. He grew up in West Virginia in the house that his father and grandfather had, and he lived in it all his life. But he was a brilliant man, and he was an aspiring writer. After World War II, where he served in the Air Force, he came back and he was working in New York. He was working at the Museum of Modern Art, I think. And when he was there, he met the wife of Ezra Pound. And it was Ezra Pound that set him off on this journey. But you've got to understand something about his foundational work. Lots of people repeat it. What you're hearing now is fourth and fifth generation of his work. What we're going to look at is from the horse's mouth today. Now, Pat, in the clickbait that he sent out, mentioned David Icke and Alex Jones. Firstly, all their work came from Eustace. And he thought David Icke was false opposition. Okay, all you've got to do is repeat everything I've said that's already out there, and then bring in that the Queen of England's a 6-foot lizard, and that discredits everything. And David Icke has absolutely no credibility among serious people. Alex Jones used to thought he was a clown. Now there was another guy at that time called Bill Cooper, who was a old school truther. But he had a pedigree. He'd been in naval intelligence. He lost a leg in combat. And Bill was one of the early guys who was speaking. He had a radio program called The Hour of Our Time. This is back in the 80s and 90s. And that showed at like 1 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon, but he had a following. And then all of a sudden, Alex Jones pops up, same time slot, direct competition. And Alex Jones is a shock jock, you know. He again, all right, discredits the truth movement through his hysteria. Now, he did wake a lot of people up after 9/11, but he didn't go to the truth of the matter about involvement of Israel. Bill Cooper did. And Bill Cooper was murdered by 2 New Mexico police officers in the car with his son at the end of his road. And Alex Jones took over. He was not impressed with any of those. So that's the first thing to understand. So back to Ezra Pound. So he got introduced, he met Ezra Pound's wife, and Ezra Pound took him to meet, Ezra Pound's wife took him to meet her husband. So next slide. That's Ezra Pound. Anybody heard of him? Okay. He was regarded as the leading intellectual of the 20th century. People like W.B. Yeats, T.S. Eliot, James Joyce, and Ernest Hemingway. He tutored and schooled them in writing, and all four of them went on to win the Nobel Prize. During the 1930s, 20s and 30s, he toured Europe, and he met other people who had lost friends after the First World War. A whole generation of white Christian boys wiped out, and he wanted to know why. So when Eustace went to meet Ezra Pound, who they put in a lunatic asylum by this time, Eustace wanted Ezra to help him write. And he said, there's enough writing, there's enough poetry, we need some truth. So he sent Eustace on task to find out the truth about World War I. Eustace then spent 5 years, 10 hours a day in the Library of Congress. Now when I say that he was unique, only he could have done it, he had a photographic memory and he could speed read 5 books a day, and he never forgot anything. Anything. And he got to the bottom of what it was all about. In 1952, next slide, he produced The Secrets of the Federal Reserve. And in this he exposed everything about how it was set up, the fact that it was the City of London and the Rothschilds that actually set it up. America was now owned by the City of London. He explained World War I. Nobody could understand what all that was about. Well, what it was about was in 1871, Germany united. It was now one big country. And they industrialised at amazing speed. And they became a threat to the British Empire. The Rothschilds wanted a war earlier, but they needed a money machine first. And that money machine was the Federal Reserve. In 1916, with the war, at a complete stalemate, the Germans say, look, how about we call it quits, everybody go back to where they were, forget it all happened. That's when Bellflower goes to the British government and says, no, we can win the war, we'll bring in America, but we want the state of Israel. So there were two reasons America got involved in the war. Firstly, in 1916, the job hadn't been done. Germany hadn't been destroyed. Not one foreign troop had set foot. Germany was as is. It needed to be destroyed. Because Germany had the audacity to use public banking. And where every other country that's used public banking, their economy prospers mightily quickly, and they must be destroyed. The other reason was the war was financed, France and Britain, by J.P. Morgan and Co. And by 1916, when it was clear they weren't going to win, the Americans had billions of dollars, even in that money, outstanding. That's why America got into the war, because they needed someone to put it on. And that was Germany. That's how America got involved in the First World War. That's why it went on for another 2 years at the cost of another 15 million lives. because it was about debt redemption, which we saw at the Treaty of Versailles. World War II was also about debt redemption, because Hitler repudiated the Treaty of Versailles, which meant that all the debts were now null and void. That's when he had to go too. What he exposed there made him an enemy. So after years of trying, the FBI got him expelled and banned from the Library of Congress. And they embarked on a series of intimidations, threats, lawsuits against Eustace since 1952 to the day he died. And they never won one. Because Eustace had such a mind that if they charged him with something, he knew more about the law than any lawyer. And he would always counter-sue and win. And in the end, they gave up. They said, stop suing us. We can't afford it. But he had this battle for 50 years, and it was because what he exposed in secrets to the Federal Reserve. Now, anybody that wants to understand what's going on in the world today, who are the puppet masters, what are the powers at work, it has to start with this as a foundation. Understanding who the money power are and what they do. We can play that clip now. This is a clip of Eustace from sometime in the 90s.
Well, the consequences are very important, and they're never discussed by any economist in the United States. The Federal Reserve Bank is a central bank. And a central bank, this is not taught in any economics class in the United States or in the world. A central bank is a bank of issue, which has the right to print all the money it wants. That's what a bank of issue means. You can print all the money you want. There's no control over it whatsoever. And right now, the Federal Reserve Bank is printing trillions of dollars, which are almost worthless, and they're looking for hyperinflation, actually, because it'll be a repeat of 1924 in Germany. But I think they've taken some precautions. It probably won't happen, because they've been through all that. They know exactly what will happen. And in hyperinflation, the money becomes worthless to the point where you have to have a wheelbarrow full of currency, paper currency, to buy a loaf of bread, which is normally worth 18 cents at that time. So they don't want to go through that again, so they're taking care of that. But the Federal Reserve has printed so much of this paper fiat currency, debt money, that it's overloaded the world. China and Japan have trillions of dollars of our so-called national debt, which is our currency. And of course they know that when it goes, it goes. When a currency becomes worthless, nothing's more worthless than a currency that becomes worthless. So they're staving off the inevitable by hedging and doing what they can. But once you buy this debt, this paper dollar currency, you're stuck with it unless you can find another sucker to take it off your hands. And there's nobody right now who wants any part of it. So China and Japan are stuck with it. And they bought this currency to maintain trade with the United States. That's all it was for. So in effect, we're financing our trade with China, trade with Japan by our Federal Reserve currency, which is neither federal, it's not federal, any more than the Federal Express Company is a federal company. And it has no reserves because it doesn't need any reserves, because it prints its own currency. If you could print your own money, what do you need of reserves? You just go and warm up the printing press and turn out another $10 billion. So, and finally, it's not a system. It's called the Federal Reserve System. It's not federal, it has no reserves, and it's not a system, but I'm the only person in the world who's ever defined it in my works as a criminal syndicate. And that's what it is. It's a criminal syndicate, just like the mafia, which is one of its subsidiaries, and the CIA and all of the criminal syndicates work out of the Federal Reserve System, because that's what a Federal Reserve System is. A central bank is a group of bankers which have total control of a nation's economy. And they print their own money, print as much as they want to, and it eventually becomes worthless and through speculation. See, a central bank is set up for speculation. the Federal Reserve System was set up solely for speculation, and its author, Paul Warburg, who was a partner of Kuhn Loeb Company in New York, which, by the way, financed the Communist Revolution, financed the Hitler Revolution, and financed the Japanese entry into World War II. So I defined in my work that a central bank's principal role is for war finance, because war finance is the most profitable enterprise you can get into. And so if you're a banker, you're looking for the best investment you can make, which is a war. For instance, the Iraq War. Now, when they set up the Iraq War, Halliburton and Company, which is the oil production company, or an oil equipment company, actually, but it finances the big oil explorations. And they found out that, oil companies found out that a war is the most profitable investment you can have. During World War I, Rockefeller, out of his patriotic goodwill, upped the price of oil 5 times to the U.S. government. That's how we won the war. And that's how he was already the richest man in the world. And the richest man in the world wants to become the richest man in the universe, which is your next step, and apparently he made that. So that's what it comes. People wonder why a billionaire wants more money. Now, H.L. Hunt's sons and 4 sons, each one of them started off life at 21 with $1 billion at that time. And as you can imagine, they haven't thrown it away. So they were, on paper, they're worth about $2 billion apiece at the present time. But who knows what their holdings are.
How's that? Okay. So most of the people that are familiar with Eustace are familiar with him because of his work on the Federal Reserve and that sort of thing. Most people are not aware of his body of work. Okay. Go to the next slide then. Now, he was researching and writing for more than 50 years. And some of his other works are here. Okay, the rape of justice. In here, he exposes just what a fraud the American justice system is and who actually owns it. And again, that goes to a lot of common law and things like that. That's how he kept winning lawsuits. Here, Conversations with JFK. This is him imagining a conversation with JFK and JFK saying what he really meant about ending this globalization and empire and, you know, trying to spread prosperity and development to the third world. There are a lot of reasons given for the assassination of Kennedy. That one never comes up. He was threatening the whole of the globalist empire agenda. Murder by injection. Now, he did a whole lot of work on the medical industry, so we're going to see a clip of that later. And Dennis will speak to that because he's done a lot more work on it. Later on, he produced The Curse of Canaan. And The Curse of Canaan, he starts back in biblical times and he traces the eternal battle between good and evil. And this is the first time he really couches any of that in a spiritual sense. Over here, the biological Jew, this is where he talks about the fact that the people that are claiming Israel now have no biological Jewish blood in them and they're essentially from Khazaria. Murder by injection, again, that's a big one. Rape of justice. The secret history of the atom bomb, not what you think. War, who owns the TV networks? Now you can still get some of his books, and I think most of them you can probably get on audio book as an alternative. A couple you won't be able to get. Go to the next slide then. These two. Here he talks about, And he was spoken about as being anti-Semitic. He was anti-Zionist. He was very sympathetic towards Jewish people because he paints them as actually the victims of the Zionists. And this one here talks about the Anti-Defamation League and the FBI and how they joined at the hip. If you look at Eustace's work, it's historical, but if you want to know how the world ended up in the state it's in now, you can find his work and it will inform you. Okay, that's just an overview. You cannot do the man justice. This is a university course to study all his work. Then can you put the next one is about his work into the medical industry. So if you can put that up, Dennis, and I'll let you speak to that.
Now the murder by injection, which is the topic of my speech tonight, is a survey of our healthcare system. Now when I started this book, I started from scratch because I had had practically no experience with doctors or hospitals in my life. And I really had no idea how they operated or what they were up to. And as I got into it, I really was horrified to find out what is really being done in the name of medicine in this country. Now, there were three people whom I used as guidestones in this, in my research. They were Dr. Emanuel Josephson of New York, whom I had known many years ago, and he wrote a book in 1939 called Your Life is Their Toy, which was a very early book about the drug trust. Now, the second man was a former Washington sports writer named Morris Beall. Oh, yes, Morris Beall, B-E, yeah, that's right, B-E-A-L-L-E. Now, Morris Beall was a Washington sports writer and journalist who, when he found out what the doctors were doing, he thought that was more interesting than any sports games that he had ever looked into. So he started to write about that. And he was the first person, as far as I know, to discover that the Rockefellers controlled all of the major drug companies. Now, when I first read that in Morris Beall, I said, well, this man certainly has done some good work, but he simply is going too far to say this. Now, one family could not control all of the major drug companies. Well, I researched it out, and I found that he was absolutely correct. And in fact, in Murder by Injection, I give the list of officers and directors of each of the major 18 drug companies in the world, and every one of those companies has 2 or 3 people from the Rockefeller interests on their boards. So the influence is very blatant, it's omnipresent, and they do control this entire situation. Now, the third man whom I benefited from was, of course, the late Dr. Robert Mendelsohn, who died very untimely last year. And it was Dr. Mendelsohn who coined the phrase, the Church of Modern Medicine, because he said that medical practice had now become a temple and that its practitioners were beyond reproach, they were little tin gods, and that the people had to do whatever they were ordered to do by these people. He elaborated on this by saying that this Church of Modern Medicine has 4 holy waters, which are vaccination, fluoridation, the silver nitrate, and intravenous feeding. And he commented that as a practicing physician himself, he had found all 4 of these things to be of very doubtful merit in medical practice. But of course that didn't discourage them. They still swear by those 4 things, particularly vaccination and fluoridated water. And one of the last things that Dr. Mendelsohn said before he passed away, he told a friend, Clinton Miller, he said, you know, I've had to come to the conclusion that all of our doctors today are nothing but drug pushers. And that was a harsh assessment, but I would tend to agree with him, because what the doctors are doing, they're simply writing prescriptions for the drug trust and loading people up with all these things. And In the Library of Congress, I found some very small, unknown books by various doctors, doctors who were dissenting from the medical practice over the past 50 or 60 years. One of them was a Dr. W.B. Clark of Indiana, and in his book, I found a very interesting sentence. He said, "I never saw a case of cancer in an unvaccinated person." Now, he wrote this in 1936. So to me, that was quite a revelation. And other doctors have said the same thing, that vaccination is really a time bomb within the human system that can go off 5 years, 10 years, 40 years after you have the vaccination. You can have this time bomb go off. You can have a stroke, a heart attack, because it's always there in your system. You never get rid of it. And apparently, it's always an alien force in your physique. Now, one of the things that I have found in the healthcare movement in this country is that we tend to be too modest about the situation. Some of them call it alternative health care. But I say that it's not an alternative, because the alternative really is death if you don't get away from this malpractice of the licensed physicians. So to me, the choice is between health care and unhealthy care. So what you want to find is the health care which will benefit you, and you want to stay away from the unhealthy care and the drugs and radical surgery of the AMA. Now, modern medicine today in the United States is a $650 billion a year business. And it is a business. It's not a profession. It's strictly a business. Now, our new president is very concerned about health care problems. He is so concerned that he has chosen a presidential commission on health care, and as chairman of this commission, he has named Senator John D. Rockefeller IV. So you have nothing more to worry about, because the family that controls the drug trust is now carrying out Bush's recommendation to improve health care in the United States. So you see, things are in good hands. Now, I was really shocked at how political the AMA was when I began to investigate it, because I say I'd never had any contact with it. I did meet a doctor here in Florida who was so disgusted with what his fellow doctors were doing to the American people that he didn't quit the AMA, he quit the medical profession. And he even gave me his card. He said, "Eustace, you can have my card." So I have a card as membership in the AMA today. Of course, it's not in my name, but I do have the card. And he would not practice anymore, and this man was a very conscientious physician, and I think he could have done a lot of good. But you see, what happens is you cannot be an individual in medical practice today because of the unionization of the profession. And even as a conscientious physician, he would have to go and be on the staff of a hospital or take his patients over to a hospital where he would know personally that they were not going to be treated the way they should be. And rather than endure that, he just got out of the whole profession. Now, I had another friend in Chicago, a very good doctor. We used to have dinner together quite frequently over the years. And he also finally quit because he told me some horror stories about what was going on in the hospitals. He said that a neighbor had had a stroke, a man in his 60s, and that they were his best friends, and that they took this man to the hospital, and all he needed was rest and bed care to see, what developed from the stroke. But the surgeons at the hospital got together and they chopped open his chest and they did all sorts of things, and they charged him $35,000, and of course he died. And this doctor told me this almost with tears in his voice, that they would have done this to one of his best friends and his neighbors. Now you can multiply that sort of thing by many thousands throughout the United States to find out what the medical practitioners are doing. Now we have to ask ourselves, what are the achievements of the American Medical Association? What does it have to offer in its defense? The only thing I can find that the AMA has done it has enthroned a particular school of medicine which is called allopathy and replaced our traditional, natural, homeopathic remedies, which pretty well gave us good health during the 19th century.
Hi guys, I think most people know me here, but I have a background in health and I did intensive care for 15 plus years. I did a lot of mental health, I did a lot of drug addiction. And it's quite humbling when you depart from mainstream health and you think you're a highly qualified professional, you think you're running wards, I guess you feed into some ego, and then you realize that the whole foundation of your training is built on what I now call fraud. So I want to make maybe 3 or 4 distinct points here. One of the first points I want to make is how important groups like this are. And I am pretty privileged to now be involved with this group for about the last 2 years. And one of the first people that I met here was Dr. Eamon McKinney. And I really want to give a big shout out to one of the first leaders of the group who is continually responsible for giving really, really good information. And I had never heard of Eustace Mullins until I spoke to Eamon. And what I find quite profound is how I continually keep discovering these names, even though I've researched all this type of information thoroughly. These people are so profoundly buried, it's quite crazy. That's the first point I want to make. The next point is, I actually have read Eustace's book. And it's quite intriguing when you go closer back to source, because I've heard a lot of the information that Mr. Mullins talks about previously, but actually going back to his book, the revelations in there were incredibly profound. He talks about the start of the American Medical Association, which essentially is a manual to push drugs. Nothing more, nothing less. There's one guy got it called Fishbein, and I have talked to a few people about this before, but Fishbein was one of the interesting points about him. He was Dr. Fishbein. Transpired that he got his doctorate, his medical doctorate in Ireland, in Dublin, and he got that before he ever travels to Ireland. So think about that. He went to trained as a doctor, and he's got his doctorate before he even went there. So we're talking about overt fraud. Anybody heard of the movie Gaslighting? Gaslighting was a Hitchcock movie where the main character tried to drive his wife mad by interfering with the gas lamp and telling her he didn't touch it. I actually haven't seen it. I'm not sure how you can make a really good movie about somebody switching up and down a gas lamp, but apparently it's quite excellent. And that was based on Fishbein, who married this quite attractive lady because he was super rich, because all drug people who had interest in drugs, had to pay him to get their drugs in the American Medical Journal. So he became quite rich. But he got sick of this beautiful woman. So for about 1.5 years, he tried to drive her crazy. And all the dirty secrets came out in open court. And as a result, plays and movies were written about this person who I'd never heard about until I listened to Mr. Mullins. The next point I'd like to make is that probably something that was really profound for me starting my journey in this direction was discovering that the holy grail of medicine, one of the holy grails, exactly as Mullins points out, was vaccinations. And I reluctantly tackled looking into this about maybe 10 years ago, 9 years ago. And to see somebody like Mullins confirm all of the research that I've been looking into this for quite a while now, I would suggest that if anybody had read his book, nobody would have got the vaccination during COVID. I'd be very, very confident to say that. So essentially, they're my main points that I really wanted to talk about, were how important this group is, actually one more point, which is very, very important, being somebody who, and I really use this terminology loosely, and I'm not being humble, by the way, I'm just being realistic. There are people who, outside of their fields of expertise, who I learn a lot from. And Mullins isn't a professional. He's not a medical expert. And I would say that I've learned as much from Mullins as I have from anybody else in the profession. So I always think that we have to look out for this thing called appeal to authority. Listen to the doctor, listen to the specialist. No. We can look outside these places and we can find some of the most valuable information out there. And that's just about it, all I've got to say. And back to you.
Well, since he's talking about the group, if we go back to Ezra Pound was a complete and total genius. And if you ever read Eustace's book about his time with him, it was like the difficult Ezra Pound. He was such an intellect that most of his work was unfathomable, but he did have one phrase that came to mind when I found this group, and I'll paraphrase because it's unintelligible on its face. It was like dissenting minds come together on the outskirts of society. And I thought, oh Christ, that's this place. But if you want to understand what's going on in the world today, understand this. It's been in movement for a long time. And what we know today, and the things that you hear from other people, much of it should be attributed to Eustace Mullins, the late great. He was a hero. He made all his money by suing the US government. You've got to bear in mind, there's probably more people now, in fact for sure, there are more people now who know about Eustace Mullins than there were when he was alive. Before the internet days, what we would call the truth movement or contrary thinkers was very small and fragmented. I hope today this man gets the credit that he deserves for the work that he produced, which has changed a lot of lives. It changed me. I first wrote to him in 1979 for a copy of Secrets of the Federal Reserve and sent him a money order to some post office box. And he sent me back the money order and said, well, I'm out of print. I'm going to print some more. I'll send them to you. Meanwhile, I'll read this book first. And that was The Great Red Dragon, written in 1888. It goes way back before the Federal Reserve, about the Rothschild money trust and everything. I never met the man, I never spoke to him, but he changed my life. And if you look at his work, you can't come to any other conclusion than, yeah, fuck, they lie about everything. Everything, except dinosaurs, that's true. Okay, last slide then.
You gotta warn me, Eamon. I gotta share screen stuff with you.
Yeah, I don't need to be on the screen.
Last slide. This one? This one.
Yeah, was there one more?
So we got this one before and this one.
Okay, that's fine. I'd just like to say though that it's very hard to find his work now. It was much more available in the early days of the internet, but a lot of it has gone missing. But fortunately, some far-sighted Samaritans downloaded it and they posted it. So if you're interested in looking at his work, Brighteon.com, just search his name, there's pages of it. And the books are hard to find, but like I said, if you can stomach audio books, they are available. Alright, that's about it. I don't know if you've got any questions that I could possibly answer. I've told you much of what I know. But once again, thank you.
Thank you, Eamon. That was a very wide overview of Eustace Mullins' work. I've got a question before we go over to questions from the audience. The book, The Great Red Dragon, sounds to me like there must be some China connection with that. And I'm just wondering if that was something that influenced the start of your career.
Well, it was written in 1888 by a guy called Woodrow. And it was about how the Rothschilds money trust came together. It's a cartel. It's when all the major banking families got together, pooled their money. And that's how they essentially took over all the major industries in the world. And that existed today. So yeah, that absolutely was. I mean, that gave the methodology. But the thing you take from Eustace's work, especially when you've got a holistic view of it, where you've seen him cover all these different subjects, it gives you an insight to the mindset of the bad guys. So when you have that and you look at what's going on in the world today, you've got somewhere where you can place that and put it in context. Because the people that he's talking about, they're not normal people like us. They don't operate on the same moral platform. And that's what he touches on in the Curse of Canaan, which is essentially where we are now. This is a spiritual battle between good and evil. Now, I wouldn't have said that 5 years ago, but today it couldn't be clearer to me. So.
Questions from the audience?
They don't actually have to be questions, because I don't know what questions you asked for that, but if somebody would like to say something, love to hear that. That work?
Sure. I've got another question for you, thanks. We saw, one of the slides was two books that were not shown on his Wikipedia bio. We can see that there's been plenty of efforts for suppression of his work. Can you give any other examples of how the establishment was aiming to suppress him? Because he managed to live to a great age of 86.
Yeah, I couldn't get rid of him. In those two books that were banned, he gets to the hard truth, and he explains the Nazi Party, where the word Nazi comes from. Well, when it was a struggling little movement where Hitler was drawing 12 people into a church hall before they all got pissed, it wasn't going anywhere, and it was called their name, National Socialist Party. But then somebody approached Hitler with the idea is, look, you're not going anywhere, you should party with somebody else. The Zionist movement. Also, they got money. That's where you get the Nazi Party from. So the Nazi Party was a Zionist party. But he makes the point that's got nothing to do with religion. If you see his work, he says that you've got two kinds. You've got the Zionists, and then you've got the Orthodox Jews who don't want anything to do with the Zionists because they're not religious. And the hatred, they were trying to convert all the Orthodox Jewish people to Zionists. So when they put the concentration camps, the guards were Zionists. They were the Sonderkommando. The Orthodox Jews were the ones that, they were committing atrocities. So he got, right from his very first work, he never held back. He went right to the truth in a way that nobody else did. But he has to be acknowledged, he was just one-off. He was a completely unique individual in every way. And many of us, we all should be very grateful for what he did. Who knows where we'd be without his work.
Question to Fabian.
Just a quick question, Eamon. The word Nazi, N-A-Z-I, the Z-I, is it correct that that stands for Zionism?
Yes.
That's very interesting.
And Eustace also, this is digressing slightly, but he makes the point that there were Christian Zionists way before there were Jewish Zionists. So if you look at the Crusades, okay, before they had the Crusades, so we're going back now at the end of the 11th century, and you had the Hohenstauffers, who was a German royal dynasty, and they received a letter. And this letter was from Prester John. And Prester John declared that he was the king of an enormous Christian empire in the south. And terrible things were being done to Christians in Jerusalem by the Muslims. And if we can get together, okay, with the Western Christians and the Southern Christians, we can, capture Zion again. So there was always this Christian fascination with Zion that far predates anything that involved any Jewish people. And that obsession remains, funny enough. So he made that case, and Zionism is not Jewish, it's an ideology, So I never heard him say a negative word about Jewish people ever. But yeah, you're right. He talks and uncovers everything. If you find his work, it will explain everything,
Over to Tones. Thanks for the talk. It's always very hard to get to the real truth in these matters because there are always counterclaims, and it's very hard to confirm the evidence on both sides. And in terms of differentiating between Zionist Jews and Orthodox Jews, I haven't found Hitler to ever have distinguished between Zionist Jews and Orthodox Jews in what I've read. Maybe I'm wrong, so you can correct me there. But I do know that Mullins did write in praise of Hitler, and he praised Hitler for eliminating Jews. So I don't think, he's done both. He has distinguished between Zionist Jews, but also praised Hitler for eliminating Jews in general. So what do you think of that?
I think the phrase was that they should put a statue to him up in Israel. Okay, he wasn't saying Hitler was a good guy, he was saying it would be in Israel without a Hitler or somebody like him. So,
Can I just say?
look, I'll tell you what Eustace did say. He said, look, when the word anti-Semitic doesn't mean you don't like Jews, it means they don't like you.
I've heard him say that, but he's also read Adolf Hitler, An Appreciation by Eustace Mullins, where he did praise him and just said for what his treatment of the Jews and get rid of them.
I never got that out there, I'm sorry, Tom. Right, anybody else got anything they want to contribute?
Thanks, mate, very kindly for a great talk and giving us an overview of everything that Eustace Mullins had put out. Would you recommend any contemporaries, like you mentioned Bill Cooper earlier, who was basically a protege of Eustace Mullins, and you've kind of distinguished the lineage between Ezra Pound and then Eustace Mullins and Bill Cooper. Is there anybody else that you would recommend? Not Alex Jones, of course, but anyone else that is studied under Eustace Mullins or written post Eustace Mullins for good reading?
Well, I'll be honest, Jeff, these days I'm trying to keep up with current events more. I've sort of pretty much got this. But in terms, so when we're talking about current events,
Yes, yeah.
when we're talking about current events, there's a lot of people whose opinion I respect, but they don't necessarily go into this.
You know what the relationship, if there was in between John Coleman and Eustace Mullins?
No, I don't know of any connection there. Well, John Coleman was a strange case. He came out with a committee of 300 and then never heard of again. At least, I've never heard anything. So I don't really know what to make of that. But no, I'm unaware of any connection. I would, if I would go back to Jeff, there's been a lot of work that's followed up on Eustace's Federal Reserve. There's an excellent documentary which, strangely enough, is available on YouTube called The History of Central Banking. And it's produced by a guy called Stephen Mitford Goodson, South Africa, who died shortly afterwards, mysteriously. But that is probably the most modern, accessible explanation for the whole of the evolution of the banking system. That's worth watching. But the point is, if somebody's waking up today and they want to know what's happening in the world, they have to start there. Because if you don't understand that, you don't understand the power that's controlling things.
Any other questions we've got?
Sorry, I'd just like to add one comment, since you mentioned geopolitics and Matt Harriet and Cynthia. I found the documentary from PBS, which is based on a book by Daniel P. Yergin, who was a Harvard doctor for economics, I believe, and it's called The Prize. It's the history of oil. And it really goes back from Azerbaijan and the burning sands in Azerbaijan. It's an 8-part series, and the book is absolutely fantastic to give you it really woke me up as far as geopolitics and the power of oil and energy and how we've been fighting for it. So most geopolitics today is, yes, there's a battle of good and evil going on, but that it's also Halliburton and oil and the Sultans and BP and just the power plays between countries to control oil. It was an absolutely brilliant documentary.
What was it called?
The Prize.
Prize.
It's the history of oil.
I read that ages ago. It's a really good book. I've got another one actually I can read you. It's about a very mysterious character who's in and around Baku when all of a sudden this grubby old desert town finds that this horrible oil that's been going out of the ground is actually worth something. And he paints this picture where it's literally like a one-horse town in the middle of the desert, and then all of a sudden they're putting up like huge mansions, you know. Yeah, there's, for those that want to find it, there's a lot of truth out there, you know. And, you know, everything that Eustace spoke about is relevant today. You know, and like I said, this is the original source material that so much of what you hear from other people comes from. Alright, I've got nothing more to say on the matter. If you're interested, go to brighteon.com and follow the works of the late great Eustace Mullins. God rest his soul. Right.